I'm Roy Osing from Vancouver, Canada. One of the big things that I love about podcasting is you get to talk and learn from everybody all over the world. Like the world's at your fingertips, and I love having these conversations. So we were talking about before the episode. We are talking about how I got up at 5 this morning, and I did not. So we had a great conversation about that. But it's one of those things where you get to have a conversation about the randomest things, and you get to learn from everybody during the conversation. So I have not talked about what we're going to talk about yet, so it should be interesting and off the cuff, which is what I like. So, Roy, first thing I usually ask is, how did you get into business? Because a lot of people sometimes inherit a business. Some people just fall into it. Some people are like, I'm going to be in business when I'm 12 years old, and that they kind of go down that path the rest of their life. And it seems like you have a lot of experience. So, when did you get into business? Because it's different for everybody.
Well, let me tell you one thing, Daniel. I did not fall into it.
Okay.
I worked myself through it, basically, is kind of the way I would describe it. But I've had literally 3 to 4 decades of trying to get it right in business. And I started very, very early in the telecom world at the
Wow.
time that it was going through this extreme metamorphosis between being a monopoly and being highly competitive. And it occurred to me as we were thinking through how we were going to accommodate the changing market conditions, it occurred to me that we weren't doing the right thing as an organization. We were steeped in tradition. We, quite frankly, were mediocre in a lot of things that would be highly relevant in a competitive world, like marketing, like customer service, those sorts of things. And so it actually led me and drove me to kind of like a very, very strong element of my brand, which I would describe as breakaway. I'm not a pivot guy. I don't like the word because it's not strong enough. Pivot suggests that you simply move on a fulcrum. I'm about changing the fulcrum and going in a completely different direction. And so, literally, my journey has been to apply breakaway thinking to basically everything, every challenge that I had. And it starts with really simple concepts, right? Like looking for differences, not similarities, right? Creating stuff, not copying stuff. I mean, the world is replete with people that benchmark this and benchmark that under the guise of innovation, which I quite frankly think is intellectually dishonest. How can you innovate when you're copying people? I mean, so what I do is my head juxtaposes things, which goes from tradition to what it needs to be. And I call it audacious leadership. That's what I've done. That's who I am. And I've had to work hard at getting things done from a very practical point of view. I'm a practitioner. I'm not a theoretician. Don't believe you can formularize good execution at all. I got a real issue with academics that try and do that and fool people. Not fair.
Yeah.
I come at it completely different. Obviously, I don't get invited to talk to too many MBA classes with the attitude I've got, but that's okay. That's okay. You need an education, but you need a heck of a lot more to succeed. And so I was asked at one point to take over and lead the data and internet company that we were starting in telecom. And this is at the time where dial-up internet and 1.5 megabit speeds were kind of like the thing to covet, right? Yeah, I know. And so I was asked to take this on, and it forced me to pursue the sort of basic drive that I have, which is to figure out what works in the real world, figure out what's different, figure out how to adapt, how to recover when you make mistakes, how to change the culture. I mean, let's face it, the telecom world was a voice world. We had to move it into a data world. It was dominated by engineering. We had to have it dominated by people that had customers and customer service and marketing in the mindset. So no, I did not fall into anything. I worked through it, I pushed through it and dug myself out of it and around the organization. And I ended up as president of a wonderful company with great people. And I guess goosebumps every time I think about this. We grew this company from startup to $1 billion in annual sales, Daniel. And that gives me goosebumps every time I say it.
That is amazing. That is amazing. That is not to be taken lightly. What is the time frame from startup to $1 billion in sales? Because a lot of people think it's like a lifetime. I mean, it could take a lifetime, but it escalates quickly when you're in a business that can scale.
Well, yeah, I mean, the time frame was basically, I would say, probably 7 or 8 years is what it was. Because don't forget, I mean, this organization had a lot of voice traditional customers, and we were now suddenly thrust upon in a completely new environment where we had to earn currency, we had to earn credibility. And I had 10,000 people in the organization. So this was not something that, it wasn't a solopreneur opportunity where you can, do stuff. So I had to work with unions. We had to work with cultures. And basically, I mean, the key for me was high tolerance for pain. By the way, I've learned pain is a strategic concept. Because when you're on this journey to grow, order of magnitude wise, you just run into all sorts of unexpected things that are sent to stop you. I mean, that's it, right? You got to push through it. And so we didn't know we were going to end up at 1 billion. What we knew was that the opportunity for us was huge. And so we set in place what I call a strategic game plan, which I had to create myself, by the way. We may talk about that if you want.
Sure.
And we just went year by year. And eventually we looked back and went, wow, look what we've done, guys. We've taken this thing in very simple, non-traditional ways and created an amazing opportunity for employees and shareholders and customers alike. And I have to tell you, I'm grateful every day that I had the opportunity to be part of that. It was just super good.
No, it's an amazing story because a lot of people think a billion's a big number. A billion's a big number, especially years ago. I mean, it's kind of inflated a little bit as the times progress, but I mean, a billion is still a lot of money. And to be a part of that organization, it's huge because, especially for so long, because you feel like you built it from the ground. You built it from the ground up. You're part of every process of it. And you said you were the president of this company?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. I can't imagine the stress and the painfulness of that. You think you kind of mentioned that. As a leader operating at that level, how do you deal with everything? I could say employees, I could say business, I could say customers, but everything as a whole, because like the pressure's got to be so immense that it's unbearable for a lot of people. But what I've learned is that there's levels to this, and what's the steps to get to that level to understand and bear that type of burden?
Well, first of all, it never gets to run itself. Okay. I mean, this kind of leadership in this kind of world, and it's even more significant now, okay, with the amount of randomness and unpredictability that's hitting businesses, you can never simply get it going and rely that it's going to keep going. Okay. That's an instant cure for death of any organization. But my approach to this was really simple. Have a strategy that was built to execute, and we can talk about that if you want. Have that strategy and use that strategy as the basis for everything I did as a leader. And I tagged that audacious leadership. The sorts of things that we did, that I did specifically, weren't normal things. I mean, they weren't complicated, but they weren't normal. And in fact, that's interesting because a lot of people would say, Roy, I mean, that's way too simple. So we've taught people to think that, greatness is complex, which is ridiculous. Greatness is really simple because it lights fires in people's stomach and gets them to do things that they otherwise wouldn't do. And so I was really focused. Okay. So if you have a strategic game plan that's built around the ability to execute, right? Like, I'm not talking about theoretically pristine. I'm talking about grounded in good business principles, but built to execute, because let's face it, I mean, the intellect really doesn't achieve anything. It doesn't. It gives you what's possible. What gets you results is actually doing stuff. And that's driven by passion and emotion and so forth. And so I was that guy that was able to create direction around igniting fires in people so that they wanted to do this, right? And that was all just driven by the desire to have a high performing organization. Because at the end of the day, if what you're doing isn't related to driving high performance in the bottom line, then you shouldn't be doing it. And so the sorts of simple, crazy things I did, people would often say, well, Roy, yeah, they're kind of fancy and cool. And I said, no. Don't ever think that I'm just doing it to be cute. I'm doing these things to drive performance. And if they didn't drive performance, we wouldn't be doing them. And so I'm a simple guy. I understand people. I understand what motivates them, and I get driven by and am focused on achieving results. And so that singular focus allowed me to actually get the job done. I'm not a to-do list guy, Daniel. I hate to-do lists because typically you can't get anything done. Some people think, wow, I got a to-do list of 20 things. Whoopee, I'm really making a contribution. No, you're not. What it means is you don't understand the critical 3 things you need to do to achieve your strategy. That's what it means. So I'm the kind of guy that drives through to those essential things to do and get people to actually do them. That's as simple as it gets. And is there stress associated with that? Absolutely, because you're pushing rope uphill, because you're fighting culture, you're fighting traditional norms, you're fighting inertia, you're fighting momentum that is going against you. Because if you want to be breakaway, don't expect the past to help you. It doesn't.
You have to almost create something new. And it sounds like your job was motivational. You motivated people and inspired people to do a good job to operate at their highest performance. So let's talk about that. What are some things that you did to inspire people? Because as you know, and I've had employees, inspiring people to actually work and actually do good work is sometimes difficult. A lot of them think it's a clock in, clock out type of thing. And I never was there personally as an employee, which is why my bosses love me, but I never wanted to excel past that point because I didn't want to be a boss till it was my own company, building my own things. So what are some quick things to inundate people to do their best job, best work?
Well, so I guess the first thing you need to do is you need to create a strategy building process that is made to execute, as opposed to serve, other kind of like academic principles. Like if you read the strategic planning doctrine out there, I mean, people get really happy because they've satisfied the theoretical pristineness and the methodology and the paradigms of strategic planning, which I had no use for because it didn't allow me to execute. So I created my own planning process, which is called strategic game plan process. I created that, okay, which allowed me to speak to people in terms of what they needed to do today differently than what they did yesterday, and ask them if they were cool with that. I mean, part of a leader's job is to get people to buy into the vision. If you can get them to buy into the game plan of the organization, and sometimes you've got to mediate, and you've got to change that based on their input, which I did all the time because I didn't have the answers, right? When it comes to serving customers, I mean, the people who are on the front line, and I spent probably 80% of my time as a leader with frontline people, okay, in the trenches, where it's messy, where there's a battle. That's where I was. And so it's no surprise that I was able to convince people based on that kind of leadership, to convince them that the journey we were on was a journey that was going to satisfy everybody. And so spending time with frontline people was absolutely critical. But I used to do other little things, which was kind of fun. That always raised people's eyebrows. Like I decided that customer service was really, really important. And there were a few things that were preventing us from actually delivering superlative performance. And I called them dumb rules. And so I came up with this program called We Need to Kill Dumb Rules. Now, a dumb rule was a rule that the organization, or a policy that the organization had, that made no sense to customers. In fact, all it did was piss them off, okay? And they didn't like dealing with us because we had these stupid rules. It doesn't matter what they are. Every organization has them. All you got to do is ask. And so I did. So I had a dumb rules committee set up, and it involved frontline people and other people in the organization. And the role of that committee was to seek out and destroy or otherwise change dumb rules. And I held my managers accountable for helping implement the suggestions, et cetera, et cetera. And I would be known to walk in the workplace every once in a while with my white t-shirt with dumb rules on the front and the back with a big circle and an X through it, to show symbolically that the journey we were on was really to cleanse the internal environment of things that didn't make sense for customers. Little things like that just lit fires in people. They were so simple, and all it was doing what frontline people and other employees in the organization knew was right all along. The secret was listening to them, Daniel, listening to them, asking, how can I help? And when they tell you, actually doing something about it. So my life as an executive was less about setting direction and more about executing an imperfect strategy. And that's missing today because leaders tend to spend way too much time planning. 80% of their time is on planning, 20% is on execution. And in a world that's going to change on you every nanosecond, try to explain to me why we do that. It doesn't make any sense. I'm your let's head west guy, right? My strategy is to head slightly west, and I'll figure it out along the way where on the West Coast we're going to end up. Is it going to be LA or is it going to be Vancouver? We'll figure that out on the basis of what we learn through executing the kind of imprecise strategy that we set. Now, people really like that. They like the simplicity. So most leaders aren't simple. And why? Because we teach that it's got to be complex. We teach that it's got to be driven by a formula. We teach all this stuff and it's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I created $1 billion worth of wealth by doing stuff exactly the opposite. So you can't convince me that the theoretical approach makes any sense at all.
That's it's very, and I think a lot of people. I mean, I think the problem with some leaders is they think they know it all, but you're going to get the most feedback from the people who actually do the work on the front end. So you got to take that feedback and relay it and actually make change, because if you make it as difficult for them, then it probably won't stick around and they'll bounce around from position to position and job to job. So it's always listening to the people that actually do the work. I'm really glad you said that, because that's one of the problems I had when I was in corporate America, because I knew it was wrong because I actually did the work. I knew it was wrong, and it was just like, this is not working. But you couldn't say nothing because your voice didn't matter. So
well, the problem is you weren't asked. See, a lot of people today talk about servant leadership, right? And they tag it as a leadership style, but it's not. It's a strategic act of leadership. And why is it strategic? First of all, I call it how can I help leadership, right? I call leadership by serving around, where the purpose is to ask, how can I help? You just described what that looks like, and actually take that away personally and get something done about it, right? And so it's a strategic act. It helps aid execution. That's why we do it. It's not a it's not a leadership style the way it's talked about, right? In literature, it is a fundamental act of strategy that leaders must perform if they want to execute well and drive high performance in the organization. I mean, I called it how can I help leadership, and people loved it. But I'll tell you, it was hard. It was hard because once you ask the question, then you had better deliver the answer. You had better deliver on what you promise, because if you don't, you're done. As a leader, you're done. And so, to your question earlier, was it what were the hard things to do? It was like, once I heard what I needed to do, turning around to the rest of the organization who were not on the same wavelength, and actually getting it done was exceedingly difficult. But that's just what the job was. And in the end, we didn't get 100% of it done, but we got most of it done, which helped us get the billion. By the way, that business today is 15 billion.
That's
crazy. It's like, boom, never look back. Who knows where it would have been?
It's ever-changing world. 15 billion. How do you build an amazing brand?
Well, again, I go back to the basic premise. I always operated from a strategic game plan. Okay. The strategy for the organization drove everything. It drove what employee engagement had to look like. It drove what customer service had to look like. It drove what marketing had to look like. It drove what sales had to look like. And it drove our brand. Now, I happen to be a guy that does not like the way branding is done these days. And let me explain why. Okay. Most brands out there, there's a whole bunch of examples all over the place. They rely on what I call claptrap. Now, claptrap is an expression that uses words like better, best, number one, market leader, premium. All words that are meaningless to a customer because there's no way to prove them. They're an expression of of what you think about yourself. In a way, they're narcissistic as hell, Daniel. When
Yeah.
you say we are the best, and I just go BS, show me, prove it, right? So there's all this approach to brands, and if you look at them, do I have an example here of a brand that's got claptrap? Oh, I don't have offhand, but all you need to do is go Google brands, and everyone you look at will have some words like better, best, blah blah blah, and famous brands. Okay,
Yeah.
now I'm not
I
saying,
can already think of a few. It's
yeah.
definitely.
So I'm not saying that that the companies are unsuccessful because of that. What I'm saying is the companies are leaving money on the table because of that, because they're not making it easy for people to understand why they should be chosen as opposed to somebody else. Okay, so I came up with this notion of the only statement. Now, it's part of my strategic planning process that answers the question, how will you compete and win? So, my answer to my own question is you need to be the only one that does what you do. Not better, not best, not number one, not the leader, the only. And so when I deal with clients around this is a really hard piece of work because you need to craft what makes you special relative to the customers that you've chosen to serve. What makes you unique? Why should I buy from you as opposed to somebody else? Okay, like the claptrap statements don't answer that at all. They just make a ridiculous claim that says we're better without any proof points. The only statement goes, we are the only ones that blah 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 blah. And I have a process to actually help people create that. The point is, when you get it, you have a statement that's binary. It either exists or it doesn't exist. It can be observed and it can be proven. And so my way of coming at branding is that, and you can use it for personal brands. You can use it for corporate brands. Here's an example of, where did I put it? Here's an example of of an only statement that I helped St. John Ambulance in British Columbia create. And it says St. John Ambulance is the only first aid advocate that provides safety solutions anywhere, anytime. Now that's pretty descriptive of what they do. And it's provable. Okay, like you can either refute it or not based on how you test it. Now we went through a huge testing process and so forth. And what we discovered is that the only statement addressed what the target customers cared about, and it was true. And there's a whole process that I used to go through that. The point is, the brand is based on the only statement. It's not based on aspirational thinking or narcissistic tendency of a company to think well of themselves. Because at the
Yeah.
end of the day, if you can't prove it to customers, then you're done. And so, but that's my approach to branding. Only statement. Now, it happens to be that my new book called Be Different or Be Dead, The Audacious Unheard of Ways I Took a Startup to $1 billion in Sales, is hitting the markets on May the 31st, will be available to people, talks extensively about this because it is so important, more today, Daniel, than ever, because mediocrity in the branding world is going up. It's not getting better, in my opinion. Others may disagree with that. And so, yeah, I'm spending a whole lot of time talking about the importance of it, talking about how to do it, and what Roy's rules of creating the only look like. And people are loving it because it's so simple, right? So simple.
The I was taking notes because that was such a powerful statement of the only, because there's a lot of customers or a lot of people that might do what you do, but you might be the only one that does this certain thing, and it cuts right through it. That was perfection right there. So I'm already thinking of ads in my head to use this because I'm an action taker. I don't just listen. So a lot of this stuff that I take in, like that right there, is the whole interview. I mean, we can end it right here and it'd be it, but I don't want to. But that was so good. That was so good to cut through the noise, because when you mentioned as far as like large companies doing like, oh, we're the best at this, and I'm like I hated that marketing, but I never could figure out what was the reason. And it was narcissistic, but that was the reason.
It is. It's the most branding statements are the ultimate manifestation of narcissism. That's a Roy quote. Okay. And it's true. It's absolutely true. And I can just pull them out of, I mean, they all do it.
Yeah,
And I think the reason is that the owners of branding, okay, are marketing communication dudes buried in an organization who are using their marketing 101 principles.
yeah,
Well, this is not about that. Okay, because nobody talks about the only except me. I'm the only one that talks about the only. That's my only statement. Nobody else talks about that. And I'll tell
yeah,
you why. They've never had to run a $1 billion a year organization. Show me one prof that has. But wow, they're viewed as experts on this. And the reality is, with all due respect, they're not. And so what we need to do is cut the clutter, you and we need to be out there beating the airwaves about the only statement, because I'm glad you picked up on it. Everybody does. And I'm happy. That's why I'm grateful to be here with you, because it gives us a chance to change the conversation out there, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That was really good. I'm already, like I said, I already have ads. I was typing it up to send to my graphics person to make some only statements
Well,
because
okay. So my offer here is, and to everybody out there, you draft up your only. You can send it to me on roy.osing@gmail.com, and I will happily give you a perspective on how I feel about it, because I do a lot of that. It's
okay,
just like, use me as a resource. Just pay it forward. I know this stuff. Send it to me. I'll help you.
that's amazing. Um, do you, I really want to get to the juice of this, but do you have any other statements like that that kind of cut through the noise? Because that was such a good one.
Um, nothing is profound. Okay, like that is rooted in the strategy development process that I created. Um, but it's not a silver bullet. Okay, I mean, there's a lot of other things that we did that were, quote, smaller perhaps, and yet just as influential. And let me give you a couple of examples. I happen to be an advocate of do-it-yourself leadership. Now, most people are upset about that because everybody's been taught that we need, as leaders, to delegate, right? And so what happens is every leader delegates everything. Well, I happen to be a contrarian, as you probably have got already from this
Yeah,
interview. I'm a contrarian about most traditional things. And one of them happens to be delegation. I believe in do-it-yourself leadership, because delegation, okay, is another way. It can be another way of abdicating your responsibilities of a leader. You delegate and walk away. There are some things that can be delegated, Daniel, okay, but there's also some strategic things that the leaders should never delegate. And I call it, you need leaders to put their fingerprints on the things that are really essential to strategy. They should not be delegated. And let me give you an example. One of the things that I did is I helped craft with the frontline people what the customer moment looked like. What are the behaviors that frontline people need to exhibit when engaging with a client or a customer to actually dazzle them, to blow them away, right? Because that drives, informs loyalty. And
yeah,
so I was intimately involved in defining and architecting that moment. People thought I was crazy. Roy, that's something you should delegate to your frontline management. Are you kidding me? This is
that's
an
the
essential
important
piece
part.
of strategy. I own it. I'm going to be involved in it. I'm not abdicating it to frontline management, because all that does is increase the noise and increase the discontinuity in the business, because they're going to come up with their own definition. And it probably won't be the same as mine because I own it. And so there was a pile of little things like that. So I call it do it yourself. I had a bunch of things associated with that. Another thing that worked really well for me is what I ended up calling hiring for goosebumps. So this is a really interesting one that basically led me to ask the question of prospective candidates who wanted a job in the company, in my company, to ask them the question, do you like human beings? Now, they were a little taken back. First of all, that I was actually, as president of the company, interviewing them for a frontline job or whatever job it was. You see, the rationale was you can't love customers if you don't like your employees, if you don't like people. If you're not a people person, how on earth can you ever, you know, deliver superlative customer service? If you want to write HTML code, that's fine. but I'm sure as hell not going to put you into a position of dealing with my most precious asset called a customer. So my objective became, or challenge became, how can I identify people that had this innate desire to actually serve people, and because they liked them. So I came up with this silly little thing called hiring for goosebumps. So I would ask you, Daniel, do you love human beings? So you would know it's a trick question. You
Yeah.
just didn't know where I was going, right? So I would ask the next question, and I would say, because you would say, yes, Roy, I do. I love human beings. I said,
Yeah.
okay, tell me a
So
story that would show me how much you love Homo sapiens. And you would tell me a story. Now, if you really didn't believe it or intellectually got where I was going, you'd give me a story, but it wasn't very compelling. I'd feel like a fish, right? It would, and I'd show you out the door. The person that really got it, that really, really did have this innate desire, would tell you a story that was rich and deep and passionate and emotional. And guess what it would do? It would leave me with
you got the
goosebumps.
job.
I hired that person. So that's Roy's recruiting. I changed the complete recruiting methodology in my organization to be more responsive, to try and do, like, I can teach you about data. I can teach you about IP. But what I can't teach you is to like and care for human beings. I can't teach you that. I can teach you to grin. I can teach you to answer a phone with a smile in your face. Daniel, I cannot teach you to love me. So what I got to do is I got to hire somebody that has a natural, God-given, innate desire to do it anyways, and I'll teach them the data business. That's what I did.
They that man, that is man, you're on a roll. That was a good one too, because a lot of people think they can train it in, but if you really want the best expertise and the best people on that front line, you need to have it already. They need to have it. They just need to have that ability. Whatever it is you're hiring, they need to have that ability. It's just the bottom line.
Well, every business needs to have needs to deliver customer experiences that are absolutely brilliant. They do. Okay, because literally, it's not, people don't buy the product. They buy the culture of the organization that stands behind the product, that will fix it when it's wrong, right? That will make it easy for you to do business with. That's a cultural thing. I can buy a smartphone anywhere. Okay, it's not the gimmicks, it's not the functionality that differentiates. So I buy a culture, and most people do. So how you treat people is a huge piece of culture that gets forgotten about, right? It does. It's just like, teach the person the fundamentals of the product and services, etc. And yet there's this whole context within which they work that's really drivers of loyalty, referrals, retention, all that kind of stuff. And I tended to go there, right? I tended to go there because if you're halfway as intelligent, you're gonna be able to learn, how the iPhone works or how the smartphone works. But what you're not gonna learn is this natural ability that when a customer comes in, to take care of them, to show empathy to them, to respond to them, right? Everything. Those are things that, in terms of my experience, are fundamental fabrics of somebody's DNA. And the challenge for us is to recruit into that and then teach them the business. It's almost like here's a culture, transpose the culture. So what business are you in? I'm in the customer service culture business. I'm not in the telecom business. So if I create a culture that delivers that, I can transpose that into any business, financial, right? Retail, hospitality. And that's the kind of mentality I had. I didn't do all of that stuff, but I'm pretty sure Richard Branson does. That's his fundamental mentality. Take customer service, push it. Buy a business and inject that into it, and it works. It really works. Simple stuff.
So let me ask you about this. So you're talking about customer service. You have people that love people. What do you look for when you're hiring sales people?
Same thing, because I don't believe that you need sales. So
Okay.
sales is a means to an end, or sales is the end of a process. So sales
Okay.
isn't a process. You see, the problem is most salespeople are product floggers. Okay, sales is a flogging profession these days. And don't tell me that it's based on relationships, because I look at behavior and I look at compensation plans. Salespeople today are comped on how many units of stuff they sell, generally speaking, right? And so it's not their fault. They do what they're paid to do. Sales should be in the serving business. And the purchase or the transaction should be viewed as the result, right, of a process of serving a client. It shouldn't be what you drive down their throat. And yet, uh, look at, I mean, I detest most sales processes because they're in your face, driving stuff at me. And unfortunately, that does nothing to enhance how I feel about the organization. In fact, it just makes me mad, and it makes me feel bullied. Okay, so my view is really simple: is that we need to start out with the premise that sales are here to serve. If they serve well, their reward is a transaction, but that's not the going in purpose, right? And today we got this huge chasm that exists between the way typically, and I'm generalizing a bit, but I'm on solid ground here. Just walk into any store and figure it out. The chasm that exists between traditional sales, which is pushing product, and the new sales, breakaway sales, which is serving people and accepting a reward for having done that job well. That's my view of sales.
Okay. I have another question. How did you find leaders in an organization? Did they kind of represent themselves on the way up, or was it one of the things where you hired leadership off the ground floor?
Well, kind of. I mean, for me, it was kind of a combination. Okay, like I had a way of figuring out who the high potential people were in my organization and who demonstrated on a consistent day-to-day basis the kind of behaviors that I thought we needed, coupled with the results. So it wasn't just behavior. I mean, you had to tie the two together, right? It's so you got somebody driving amazing results and exhibiting the behaviors. One explains the other. You could also get the situation where you get, mediocre results and bad behavior, etc. But my high potential program was fueled with people that basically understood what we were trying to achieve and exhibited the behaviors required to get there. And to the extent, I mean, I honestly had a bias for wanting to stay inside. I really did, because they got what we were trying to do. They understand the strategy, and that was good. Sometimes I couldn't do that. All right, I had to go outside to bring in different competencies, because don't forget, we were changing cultures. We were going from an old telecom world into a new IP based environment, and so you had to mix. But I always had my hands on people. I always did. I always knew who were the high potential movers and shakers in the organization, and I made a point of staying in touch with them, staying close to them, learning about them, so that when I had to make a decision, I had like 10 people sitting there that I could choose from, which was quite gratifying, to be honest.
Yeah. So you almost like nurtured them to an extent where when the opportunity presented itself, you already knew who the pool was, and you should have sorted out who
Yep.
it was at that point.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. It's one thing. It's one thing. It's a difficulty to hard. It's hard to find good leaders sometimes because not everybody understands the mission, and they might not resonate with it either. So you have to have a large amount of people that are participating, and then you kind of sort them out from there.
Well, for me, when you look inside, if somebody didn't understand the strategic game plan, they were never considered. I mean, that's pretty fundamental.
Yeah,
How can you actually ever want to be considered in a leadership position when you can't identify with the strategy of the organization? I mean, that tells me you're lazy or stupid, one or the other, right? You should know it, okay? And you should. The other concept that I came up with is what I call line of sight leadership. Like, it's one thing to know what the strategy is. It's another thing to be able to translate that strategy into every function in your business, right? And so, for example, what does a customer service rep have to do on a day-to-day basis to actually serve the strategy? Do they have a direct line of sight to that strategy? Do they understand it? That was my job as a leader, to explain that and to work with them to actually figure it out. What do I have to give up? What do I have to take on? All those dynamics. And my direct report team, If they weren't able to do that, it would tell me that either they didn't know how to do it, which I didn't accept, or they didn't really get the strategy, which I didn't accept either. So it was a major issue for me.
Yeah.
The translation part of great leaders gets forgotten. It gets buried in the need to delegate, Daniel. That's the problem, right? Why should I translate when I'm supposed to delegate? And all books tell me to delegate. Well, this book tells you not to delegate. This book tells you be strategic on that, right? Make a difference. Put your fingerprints on it, right? That's what you're getting paid for.
Digging a little bit deeper. Our whole thing is like we do a lot of automation, so it's like one of those things where we try and automate a lot of the processes. So even where people do jump in, they're doing less of what they normally would do in general. So we try and automate a lot of our processes and as a whole. But one of the things you always can't automate is the customer service. Customer service is always going to be there, and sales are always going to be there.
Well, there are. I mean, look at how our AI is being used, though. Okay, I mean, I can't look at try and convince me that a chat bot helps me be passionate about an organization. Okay, because here's another great example, right? Of using algorithms based on somebody's perception of what customers need. Okay, the reality is normally when I have an issue on a web page, it's not one of the 100,000 people that have already captured in the formula or algorithm. It's something different. So a chatbot in that sense is freaking useless. Okay, and trying to automate that to a degree might make sense, but you better allow the capability for the customer to get the heck out of that process. I mean, I've been on web pages with no telephone numbers. No, I'm sorry, I may be an older dude, but I'm totally into engagement. And if you're actually crazy enough to think you can automate every aspect of customer demand, then you're insane.
Yeah.
And yet, my observation is when I look at how AI is going, that's exactly the end result. And so my conclusion is, first of all, it'll never be achieved. And so it's really for automation, my view is you need to be selective. If you can automate the things, right, that don't require that sort of personal engagement, right, to build loyalty, if you can automate that stuff, and if the customer agrees that it's okay, you see, because you never ask them, you just do it, right?
Yep.
Ask them, and if they're okay with it, fine, do it. But if they tell you, Daniel, no, 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 let me tell you, okay, with this process, no, I need an out channel. I need to be able to do this. Then, I mean, if you're serious about service and you're not blowing smoke up my butt, you need to listen to that.
Yeah.
I used to have customers on a panel to review what we do for them, process wise. Now, we weren't obviously in the AI world, and so our level of mechanizing was different, but it was still in principle the same thing we're talking about.
User feedback. User feedback is essential.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I don't know about you, but I really get cheesed off when I sit on the end of a telephone, for example, trying to get to a call center and keep hearing these recordings tell me not to hang up because my call is important to them, even though I've been there for 55, 60 minutes.
Yeah.
Now, there's an example, though, okay, of where I like automation, because the people that come back to me and say, hey, listen, on the recording, hey, listen, you're going to be here for an hour, right? If you'd like to keep your place in line and we'll call you back, give us your telephone number. I don't mind that. I really don't mind that. And that level of automation, for me at least, it may not be for somebody else, but for me, it works, except if I'm really heavily under pressure and I can't take a call at any time during the day. And so the issue for you guys is to make some sort of an assessment. Okay, in the realm of delivering memorable customer experiences, how do you think automation of a number of those processes will influence that? Will it contribute to it? Will it contribute here or detract here? You need to know that, as opposed to just blindly flogging the automation process. It's kind of like selling in a way, flogging it in there, hoping that it's not going to create a problem. And my sense is that's a lot of that happens, and it does create a problem, and everybody knows it going in, but it's not accommodated. I don't know. So
Yeah,
you can be an enlightened one, my friend, by doing
yeah.
it the right way.
We layer in conditional logic, and we layer in automation with that. So people are like, "Oh, this is so perfect example." Our clients message us and like, "Oh, this is a robot responding." Like, "Oh yeah, it's a robot," and I'll kind of like mock them a little bit and tease them a little bit, showing them it's not automation, but it's one of those things where I can interject at any moment and break that line that they think it's automation. So
Well, that's good.
it's one of the cool things that we do, and it kind of I think it kind of separates, and it helps ease the client in a way, because it's not so direct, because everybody thinks they're on automation these days in some way.
Well, I think the process has got the accent on the wrong syllabula. Okay. So, for
Uh-huh.
example, it's more about let's automate and then figure out, around that where we need other kinds of interaction, as opposed to say, what interaction do we need to drive memorable experiences? Okay. And that's the vital layer. The residual, why don't we look at that and automate that? See, that's a much more logical process in my view. Okay, because that's not the push process. The process says automate. This doesn't. This has a higher order objective, which is based on the experience. And then asks the question, okay, what contributes to memorable experiences? And what is that other layer where it's not critical? And yeah, we can automate that and facilitate that and do whatever we have to there. But that top layer, that's vital for moments of truth. I mean, in a way, it's like with Tony Hsieh. I don't know if you remember him. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. He used to be the CEO of Zappos, right? Shoe company in Las Vegas. His view was unfortunately he's no longer with us, but his view was around call centers that you never outsource that was such a vital component to delivering what he called happiness. That was the culture he was trying to create, which translated into amazing service experiences for his customers. He said, no, call centers should never be managed from the point of view of a cost to be controlled. You need to manage those assets as a loyalty creator. And so he insourced them against what most of the world does right now is they outsource call centers, right? To every part of the world based on driving unit costs down. He took the opposite approach and said, if I'm going to deliver happiness to my customers, I need to own the call center. That's sort of what I'm talking to you about here. If you want to deliver and own the customer experience, there are certain functions you should not automate. Figure that out first, then look at the residual and automate that. If you don't do it that way, then don't you ever tell me that you're interested in delivering memorable experiences, because you're lying in my face. Done. Boom. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Simple, irrefutable truths, Daniel.
And I know we probably answered this question, but what is a quote that is yours or somebody else's that you resonate with? That's probably your only one.
My only a quote that I have, or a quote that somebody else has.
It's either yours or somebody else's.
Well, you're probably too young to remember this, but one of the most significant mentors I had was the Grateful Dead. Now, do you remember the Grateful Dead? So you probably
I
don't.
I'm aware they're a rock band.
Okay, so they're a '60s kind of or band, and they were the most famous, profitable touring band in history, rock band in history. It wasn't the Stones and the Beatles and all these other kind of bands. Grateful Dead. The thing that they had was a leader called Jerry Garcia, who was not only a great guitar player, he was an amazing business person. And they've written books about this. I'd suggest you check it out. They've got a book that I love called The Marketing Lessons from the Grateful Dead. And these guys, in a world with no social media, no technology, right? They created fans. They created this experience-based culture called around Deadheads, if you're a fan, that made them very successful. Jerry Garcia said something that I found out about only after I did my only work. And it sort of told me I was on the right path. And he said, you don't want merely to be the best of the best. You want to be the only ones that do what you do. That credo drove the Grateful Dead to be truly amazing. And it also separated Garcia from most business leaders, just the vision he had. Like you know what he did? He actually created infrastructure right at his concerts and that would allow people to come in and record their music. Now, this was at a time when people didn't want to share anything, right? Like patents and rights were so important. And Jerry said, hey, this is ridiculous because if we share our music and somebody records it, guess what they're going to do with that? They're going to share it with their friends. And God, that's got to be good somewhere along the line. Why would I worry about rights? And in the face of that, he was contrarian, went in there, and the rest is history. And in fact, you go on you Google Grateful Dead's website. They are still selling merchandise, my friend. I mean, what an amazing machine! Just based on catering to what people cared about and how they wanted to feel about music and things like that. Simple things that resonate with people and create economic success. We've got away from that. We need to get back to it. And that expression, that phrase, that quote it's always with me, always with me. And I love the Grateful Dead music.
Okay. You're a real deadhead. No, that's amazing. I think it's whenever I think about branding back then, it's so easy nowadays. So easy with technology. But to do it back then, it's got to be amazing. Because like I always think of like Michael Jackson, because Michael Jackson was literally the biggest superstar ever, and he's back at that time where it was how do you build this thing that no one even's never built before? You know, you're really trailblazing and creating new everything, new marketing strategies, new content creation strategies. Like this, it's amazing. It's amazing to think about. I'm really glad you mentioned that because I never heard of that story before. That's really
well.
Cool.
The other one that I really like is an absolute fan of Lady Gaga. She, as a leader, is amazing. When you look at her story, she's sort of like got the intuition of what I just described in a more current world in terms of fan-centric behavior. All that kind of stuff. She's amazing as well. But there's a lot of people who just you said an interesting phrase. It's so easy, and in part that's part of the problem.
Yeah,
it is easy, and ease sometimes is assumed to be right, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. And I just would urge people to start out with figuring out what is right, and then look at technology. Don't use social media the way everybody else does just because you think it's right, or the proponents or the advocates of the platform say they're right. Figure out what you want to do first, and then ask yourself the question, what's the role of social media? And so that first piece, in my opinion, rarely gets done with the due diligence and the effort that it requires. That strategy in my world, that game plan should drive and inform everything you do. Everything. Nothing should be bottoms up. It should all be tops down, unless you want a dysfunctional organization, of which there are millions. And I keep saying, I think I know why. It's like I constantly get asked opinions about things that I simply say I have no opinion. Roy, what do you think about this communications plan that this company has put in place? What do you think about the social media strategy that they've got? And I keep saying, I don't know. The reason I don't know is I don't know what they're trying to achieve. I don't know the strategy of the organization. I don't know the game plan that the organization has. And unless I know that, I can't give you an interpretation, because I'm really good at translating or associating action with a game plan. I can tell you whether you're on strategy or off, but I need that game plan. That's the anchor. You need to have one. Everybody needs to have one. And it needs to be constantly refreshed and driven down to minuscule details, because that's how you make it execution oriented. right? There's too many people acting just at the tactical level. You know, I ran into one last night at a meetup I was doing, and she says, "Well, I'm into social media." And I said, "Oh, good." I said, "What are your clients doing?" "Oh, well, they're adopting all the modern social media, etc." I said, "Do you know what their strategies are?" And she said, "Well, no, we haven't figured that out yet."
You missed the boat then.
I have a hard time with that, man. Just keeping my mouth shut is really hard.
Well, I think you're very in tune to what's going on, and I commend you for that because not calling you old or anything, but my parents struggle with
I'm
technology.
older. Yeah,
They struggle with it, and it's just one of those things where I've talked to people that never adapted to the change and they got left behind so fast.
it's true. Well, I'll tell
So
you one thing I'm really happy. I have 4 grandchildren, just to keep it real. And my youngest grandchild, 3 days ago, opened a TikTok account under Audacious Ways, and it's my account. So she is hell bent on getting me into TikTok. And already she's posted a video with some of my expressions on. If you go to my Unheard of Ways Instagram account, what I try and do is make my content real by just posting expressions and quotes, etc. So she went into my Instagram account, grabbed some stuff off, bang, put it on a reel, and then she phoned me the next day and says, "Papa, we got 500 we got 500 likes or whatever the hell you call it, views, and 35 likes." And I said, "Is that good?" And she says, "Yes, it's really good." So I'm struggling sometimes, Daniel, but I'm trying to keep up with it. I'm just trying to keep up with it.
I mean, it sounds like you have a social media manager already.
That's right. I should tell her she's my vice president of social media. She'll go, "What's that?"
It's the boss of the internet for
That's
me.
right. Oh, she'd love that. Supreme commander of all that is cyber, huh?
Yeah, give them positions. I
Yeah,
think it's one thing that's and I think we'll end towards this is that younger generations have a leg up because they were born into this world. Like me, I turned 30 this week, and I've seen the transition from the 90s to the 2000s where cell phones weren't even, I mean, cell phones were big, literally big back then, and they kind of transitioned to smaller, and now we have something crazy that wasn't even a thing. Whereas people born in 2000s, they were born into technology 100%, so they understand. I watched TikTok about how kids are taking tests online and they're looking at the back end code to find out the right answer versus actually knowing the answer. So it's one of those things where like you literally have to change how you do things because yeah, now we can put it online, but they can look at inspect the code and see what the answer is. So now it's not even education at this point.
well, I mean, it's a classic example of what we were discussing earlier about being infatuated with the technology and the base level tactical tools that we have, and not at the higher level purpose that they were intended to achieve. It's like it's total infatuation, and I see that all the time in people asking questions like, "Well, how should I use this? How should I use that?" And I keep saying, "Well, I don't know. You need to tell me what you're trying to achieve." And so
Yeah,
I apply some rigor there, to try and get a really crystal clear view as to what the strategy is. Now, most people, they don't want to take the time to do that. They would rather play with infatuation. And I don't mean that in an unkind way. That's just the way it is right now. But I don't know, my drive in doing what I'm doing here with my work, etc., is to try and shift that around a little bit and at least get people asking the question, why are we doing this? What's the intended purpose? Are we actually achieving our goals? Simple questions. And it confuses people and it frustrates them because they've been taught to operate at that tactical level. That's where the joy comes from. That's where the joy of being on TikTok comes from. Not how the hell should I be using it?
yeah,
What part of the strategy does it serve? Like for me, it won't serve any. I'm doing it because my granddaughter. So it serves a different purpose. My
yeah.
relationship with my grandkids, which is exceedingly important, right? And so I just choose to do things differently for them. would be hard pressed to say that's going to add a lot of value to my business. Well, we'll find out eventually, maybe.
Eventually, it's one of those things where I see social media as a be consistent. Don't expect results day one because it's not never going to happen day one, and it's something that it's a long term play to give you a digital footprint, and that's how I see podcasting and all the social media I do in general. And we're heading to a digital age, so I want my digital presence to be so large you can't help but look at us.
Yeah, and you see, interesting, just the way you talk about it is not consistent with the way I think. Right? I do what I'm doing here for a very specific reason. It's got nothing to do with podcasting. It's
Okay.
got to do with a channel, right? That I can push my voice through to try and change the conversation in the world, because you have access to people I can't get access to. So you, as a vehicle for me, are extremely important and extremely
Necessary.
consistent with what I'm trying to achieve. That's why I'm doing this. It's not for any digital reason. It's got nothing to do with being able to say I've done X number of pod. It's got nothing to do with that. If I didn't feel that talking to you was helpful in terms of my journey to change the conversation in the world around being different, then we wouldn't be having the conversation. And unfortunately, I don't think that having a huge digital footprint, you'd have to convince me that that's going to help me do it either. That it's the same thing. I don't know. Haven't thought about it before. I will, based on what you just said, but it's not my natural go-to logic.
It's the different. And maybe it's another conversation. It's definitely another conversation, but it's for me it's intuitive because people nowadays I'm gonna Google Roy Osing. I'm gonna Google him and see what comes up. So having that Googleable power is powerful in itself. Because I was at an event and I'm like, oh, how do I get in contact? I'm like, just Google me. I'm on Google.
Yeah, and maybe I'm expressing it wrong, because the way you're describing it is definitely consistent with my thinking. Like I'm totally out there in terms of there's only one me, and if you Google me, you get a lot of stuff. So there's a lot about me on the internet. There's tons. I don't really think about it though the way you just described it. I may get the same result. I just don't think about it that way. I just keep doing it. I know that getting onto the internet in various avenues and using various channels, I know that's the right thing to do. And maybe it's just a different language approach to describing the benefits. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm not saying you're wrong or I'm right. It's one of those things where like, Daniel Martinez, have a very popular name, so I have to distinguish myself amongst all the noise because I have a very popular name. So whenever I use my name in general, I use my middle name because my middle name is what differentiates me from all the other Daniel Martinez's out there. So it's one of those things where like it's really hard when you have you're John Smith. Like you have to break through a lot of noise just to break through at any point in general. Just very because you have a very popular name. So it can be difficult for some people to cut through the noise in the online space because you have a very popular name. Whereas like
there's only one Be Different or Be Dead out there. There's only one Roy Osing out there. So I don't have a problem that way. There are a few Osings I've discovered, actually. They must be related. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I've decided that, yeah.
It's and this is like it's I guess it's a Hispanic thing for me because like my brother Jose, he almost got arrested because somebody had a warrant out with his name. It's one of those things where like, no, I've been in this address forever. Like that's not me. I'm like, you have to separate yourself from everybody else because you have a very popular name, and it's
right on.
It's frustrating.
No, you're absolutely right. The cutting through the clutter takes a lot of different approaches. Yeah. I think it actually, and for you guys who are in the podcast business, and I've done a number of them, so I'm sort of getting a little more familiar with the kind of challenges that you have. Having a game plan that actually informs how you differentiate using an only statement is critical for you. Your name is part of that mix, but it starts out with, okay, you're one of, I don't know how many podcasts out there. What's how many are in the same space that you are in, and how are you differentiating from those, not the market in general, but just those people in your same space, and then how can you leverage your name within that? I mean, kind of like goes ka-chunk, ka-chunk, step by step process, and eventually yields you with the right information you need to actually get an only statement and get it done. But
Only statement. I'm the only
unique.
statement. The only statement is so powerful, and I think we'll end with there because that has been the key realm of this conversation, and I'm gonna find a way to put it in the title too.
I want you to do that. I want you to do that. And let me give you the title. Okay, Roy is the only one who does what he does. Listen in.
There you go. All right. There you go.
Or something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
heaven forbid that I should suggest to you what the title should be. But you know what? The more focus we can get, and I say we because, I mean, I'm looking for help. I'm looking for advocates of
Yeah.
my work. And to the extent that I can get more advocates, I get more minds that I can help shape towards something that I think is important, particularly now. Yeah, I mean, my first book, Be Different or Be Dead, I wrote, Daniel, in 2009. It's 13 years out there. And yet the content, and this is an updated version, which is coming out on May the 31st, the basic content has been updated and given it a little fresher appeal, but the fundamental principles haven't changed. I mean, here's some content that's had a shelf life of 13 years and is even more important today than it was in 09. I mean, that's pretty, I mean, that's staggering to me. I mean, I never even realized that until somebody told me that that's one interpretation of my work.
You're creating a legacy, and you want people to carry on the legacy.
Boom. Boom. That's exactly right. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. Thank you for that. I appreciate that perspective. Yep.
I recognize it because it's something that I have the same mission as a producer in the world. Is I want to produce something and create a legacy that lives beyond me. Because if my reach and my voice is ever heard in generations to come, which is why I put myself digitally on the internet space, is because I'm trying to create and I'd rather create something than just consume it. So I'm trying to create my own lane and create legacy that hopefully lives beyond me and my kids carry.
Well, you're actually you're I think you're doing more than that. You're actually creating experiences. When you talk to somebody, you're actually in the process of that engagement. It's an experience for people to witness. I mean, that's incredibly powerful way to look at your business. Like it's information content, but it's really a show, and it's really an experience that will create certain kinds of feelings for people that will make them grateful, that will make them happy, will make them angry, will make them disagreeable, whatever. But it's going to create a response, and that's a power. That's a power not to be taken lightly. And by the way, just for the record, I think you're doing a really nice job. I'm quite enjoying this, and I think you're great at what you do.
I'm the only one that enjoys doing what I do.
Okay, that's a start.
I mean, it was off the cuff. I mean, I'm just learning this over the last hour, so I gotta get some practice.
Give you a break. I know. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate your time. I'm gonna put your book up for everybody listening. It is Be Different or Be Dead.
Be different or be dead.
.com. Be Different or Be Dead. I am not a reader, but I'm trying to be. So I bought a book last night, and I'm going to try and read it. And I bought the audiobook too because I can struggle with it. So I'm going to read it while I listen to it. Is what I heard is people do these days.
Yeah,
So
the ebook is out. The printed version will be out on the 31st of May, so it's close up.
May 31st, Be Different or Be Dead. I love how you see. I know you're a Deadhead fan because you even put it in your name. It resonates with everything you do.
Yeah, I like skulls. I'm into skulls and that sort of stuff. Yeah, well, the original idea I had was Be Different or Be Dead is a strategic name. It's a strategic title because it's really saying if you're not different, you're dead or soon will be, is kind of like the other way I talk about that. The or soon will be is in brackets. So it's like the ultimate consequence of not being different is being dead. And if you look around, particularly over the last number of years, you will find that the companies that go out of business, okay, have lost their relevance. They're irrelevant. They're not different. They're part of the herd. They're part of the crowd. So they die. I mean, and today it's even, I think, more intense because there's more competition. There's more businesses, and the internet has fueled millions of businesses. So the need to differentiate is greater now than it's ever been. My conclusion, however, is in the face of that, businesses do a more mediocre job than ever before. Hence my angst and my drive to spread the word about the only statement and the need to be different.
That's amazing. All right, we're going to end it here. For everybody listening,
All right.
BeDifferentOrBeDead.com. Go get the book, May 31st. Go check it out. I will buy the book because I resonate with the statement and I want to help carry on the legacy because I feel the power in it and I recognize the power in the only statement. So I like it.
Thank you, Daniel.
Appreciate your time, Roy. And hopefully we'll have a conversation in the future about how we're going to use the only statement to build our brand.
Well, that would be great. And thank you for having me, Daniel. I've enjoyed it and I'm grateful to be able to touch your audience. So thanks. Appreciate it.
No problem.